Truth Espresso, episode 290.
Face it, we all would rather sleep in this morning. That's why God gave us espresso, to kickstart our zombified corpses into hyperdrive. And now, giving your mind and soul the morning shot of truth it craves. This is Truth Espresso with Daniel Minnick.
Well, hello there, friends, family, foes, and lurkers alike. This is your host, Daniel Minnick, yet again with another episode of Truth Espresso. If you've listened to the last few episodes, I would like to say, testing, 1, 2, 3. Am I coming in loud and clear and crisp? I thought I had fixed my sound issue last week, in fact, because with a particular cord I was using to connect my microphone via USB to my laptop to record, my microphone was turning off unexpectedly. And so I replaced that USB cable with another one, and everything seemed to work okay. And through my headphones, I was hearing what sounded like a nice, crisp, clear tone as I was testing the microphone, and it sounded like what I used to hear when things sounded better, when I plugged my microphone into the USB port on my laptop. But I've gotten feedback, and as I listened to what I had recorded last week, somehow, even then, things sounded muffled. And so what I am doing now is I am going to ditch the USB, and I'm going to use XLR. Now, not to get into the weeds on this is the method by which I use an audio interface. So instead of plugging the microphone directly into my laptop in a USB port, I have it plugged via XLR cable into an audio interface that I then plug that into the laptop, and it seems that things sound a little better. And in fact, whenever I record with my wife, that's what I've been doing with our two microphones set up, and I figured I wouldn't be lugging that interface around when I record solo. I'm often recording my solo episodes in another room, trying to make things a little more portable, but as it turns out, it seems that the USB feature on my microphone, either I haven't figured out how to make it sound better again, maybe I messed something up there, or the USB functionality in my microphone is just going bad. And so, problem solved for now. I'm going to carry my audio interface with me even when doing solo episodes so that I sound nice and crisp. So for this episode of Truth Espresso, I'd like to get into a topic that we might get to have a little bit of fun with, but at the same time, it's not so fun for people in a certain state in the United States, because I want to talk about the recent law in California to force the minimum wage for fast food workers from $16 an hour to $20 an hour. So in California, it seems that fast food is becoming a luxury. Fast food is the new steak dinner. It's your once-in-a-while pleasure after you have saved up some money. And getting fast food for your whole family could make a serious dent in your wallet. In California, to work at a fast food joint is also becoming a luxury. If you can get a job at McDonald's, you're part of a privileged class. And that's because of a new law that Governor Gavin Newsom signed that went into effect April 1st, 2024, and is making no small changes to the economy in California. According to a September 29th, 2023 article from Business Insider, entitled "Fast Food Workers Will Make $20 an Hour in California. Here's Why Panera Bread Was Exempted from the New Law." And that's the title of the article. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Panera Bread exemption or alleged non-exemption in a little bit. But according to this Business Insider article, quote, "Starting next April, 557,000 fast food workers in California will get a nearly 30% pay increase to $20 an hour at 30,000 restaurants in the state, unquote. Will they now? Are all these workers going to get to enjoy a nice 30% pay increase because of a law demanding that restaurants pay people more per hour? Are all 30,000 restaurants in the state going to stay open and pay all of their employees this new amount of money and somehow simply eat the new costs? For those who advocate things like a minimum wage, or especially raising the minimum wage significantly after economies have had to adjust to the difficulties of every minimum wage hike, supporters of minimum wage seem to have this idea that businesses are just plain greedy, and that they always pay their workers the absolute minimum that they can squeeze out of their coffers. Somehow, people who manage to garner the capital and take risks and invest it into capital equipment, into buildings, and realize that they do need to have other human beings involved to be successful, and that there's some low-skilled labor that they can delegate out, and that they have to pay for it. Somehow, because they're the employers, that by definition they're always greedy, unlike people who want to do the low-skilled labor. Somehow they're not greedy relative to how they're paid. Then the heroic legislators arrive, backed up by Union cabbage. And the solution is simply to force these businesses, these employers, to pay the workers more per hour. So even though businesses have to compete for workers, they can't just pay them 1 cent an hour, because if one business offers 1 cent an hour, another can double that and offer 2 cents an hour, and another 3 cents an hour, and up until we come to a competitive equilibrium point. We have a mutual situation where someone feels that it's worthwhile to agree to be paid a certain amount to put in the time and labor for that company, because they consider the paycheck of a particular amount worth their time and effort. And on the other hand, the employer also considers that labor that they get that contributes to the productivity and ultimately results in profits worth paying those salaries, or paying those hourly wages. So businesses have to compete for workers, and if one recognizes how this works, both with labor and with money, and supply and demand, you ultimately end up with a situation where there's a meet in the middle. But political activists can't seem to accept that. They always look at current situations. They always look at society and see that some people struggle, and so that the solution somehow is always simply to force one side to cave merely for the benefit of the other side, that somehow one side, the business side, has all the money in the world and they can simply just force a certain hourly wage, and then the business is just, they have the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. They could just simply dole out money. It's like they have the government mint. They have a printing press. They're like, businesses are the Federal Reserve itself. They can just always pay what some activist law demands that they pay, because somehow, whatever record profits that they are allegedly getting, no one knows how to do the math to realize that, sure, you could have millions or even $1 billion in profit, but if you have all these employees, that makes it happen. If you jack up the minimum wage by this much, you can eat the entire bottom line for a business. In fact, a previous episode of Truthspresso that I did a few years ago, I talked about Walmart and their razor-thin relative profits. Now, they might make anywhere from $5 to $20 billion a year. They're quite fluid in that way and unpredictable, yet their revenues for the year can be like $400 to $600 billion. So relatively speaking, their profit margins are quite thin. And if you were to take all of their profits for a year, and if you were to divide it among the 20 so million Walmart employees, the entire profits for a year would only be able to give them $1, $2, or $3 an hour more. Not enough for what the activists are wanting, fight for 15 years ago, now fight for 20, and so on. Walmart could not afford that, and so they would have to do something else other than simply eat the costs and pay all the existing employees $20 an hour. Now, the problems for fast food, and especially in the state of California, had been boiling for a while, but now the heat is on. The books were definitely cooked when it came to California's Fast Recovery Act, and this act was updated in what Gavin Newsom signed in 2023. Fast food workers found themselves jumping from the frying pan and into the fire on April 1st, 2024, and they learned that this was no April Fool's joke. So the Fast Recovery Act, as updated by California Assembly Bill 1228, mandates that any chain operating in California, any fast food chain that has at least 60 locations nationwide, not in California, but if they have a nationwide presence of at least 60 locations, then they're obligated to pay all of their fast food workers at least $20 an hour. Now, what are the solutions to this? Does every business somehow magically pay all their existing workers, and even ones that they had otherwise intended to hire, $20 an hour? Do they just simply eat the costs? Can they afford to eat the costs and remain profitable? Or there are other ways that they can comply with this law. Now, notice that the mandate is only the hourly rate. Businesses aren't required to make people work a certain number of hours or allow them, if they so desire, to work a certain number of hours. The mandate is only that they have to pay them at least $20 per hour that they work. Now, going from $16 an hour to $20 an hour is a significant chunk of change. That's a 25% raise from one day to the next. But consider this, McDonald's doesn't have to pay employees to work a full 40 hours a week because of at-will employment. Without a contract, which usually you don't sign a contract to work on a McDonald's line or as a cashier or someone taking orders, McDonald's and other franchises and chains can offset the new hourly labor costs in other ways. So let's consider some of the ways that businesses can, and we'll see in fact do, handle these crushing mandates. So fast food places can decide to lay off some workers, particularly ones that they determine that their output isn't worth $20 an hour. So what do? You find some of the expendable employees, those who are just barely putting in their effort. If you've seen some of the videos, there was one of those trends a few years ago. It's probably still going on now, the Act Your Wage movement. Like you've heard of Act Your Age, but then there would be some people, most likely on TikTok. Since I don't have a TikTok account, I've had to see some of this secondhand. But there is the Act Your Wage movement, in which some low-skilled workers or ones making lower wages, such as working in fast food or doing secretary work or something like that. It's not a high-skilled job, so the wages are modest per hour. And so Act Your Wage was to kind of just work half-heartedly, demonstrate that you're not really putting in much effort because you consider that somehow because your wage is low, that you're only going to put in the minimum effort required to scrape by at the job. And of course, there's nothing biblical about that kind of attitude. But Burger King in California could look for any employees that kind of slack off or slide through on the job and terminate those employees whose output isn't worth $20 per hour. Now remember the Business Insider article that I mentioned earlier that said that 557,000 fast food workers in California would get a raise. Well, that prediction didn't age well, nor did they understand basic economics. Merely forcing hourly wages up by 25 to 30% will not guarantee that all the workers will get a raise in pay. If there were 557,000 fast food workers before April 1st, there will likely be fewer than 557,000 workers after April 1st when the wages are forced to adjust. Instead of getting a raise in pay, some of them were about to get a huge reduction in pay to $0 an hour. They get the pink slip. They get told that they can't come in that morning because they're now out of a job, and think they otherwise would have come in, got to work, and get paid, but because they didn't ask for $20 an hour, the business didn't offer them $20 an hour, but some middleman, the government, the workers' unions, stepped in the middle and put a wall between the two sides that mutually agreed on a work rate agreement and said, you can't agree to work for this, you can't agree to pay them this, so it's better that you can't work together, and it's better that this person make $0 an hour instead of 16. Here's an example of this. For instance, Pizza Huts in California announced as far back as December 2023, after the law was signed in, I believe it was September, that they would need to give about 1,200 delivery drivers the pink slip to prepare for the forced economic disaster looming for April of 2024. And this is from a USA Today article entitled California Pizza Huts Lay Off All Delivery Drivers Ahead of Minimum Wage Increase. So, ouch. There's a lot of young people, teenagers, and college students who like to make ends meet. They like to drive cars, and so it's an easy job for them to be able to just drive a car and get paid for it. But now, because of activists demanding that they get paid $20 an hour, all these delivery drivers for Pizza Huts are going to make $0 an hour. Another Business Insider article from March 27th of 2024 entitled Fast food restaurants in California are laying off workers to prepare for the $20 minimum wage hike. And as I looked through this article mentioning the various places and what they were planning to do for layoffs or had already laid off, if you add up what has happened so far and what could be the potential as the dust is settling on the effects of this new $20 fast food minimum wage, there are and there will be thousands of layoffs. So, to cope with this kind of tragedy, businesses can lay off workers. Another option on the table, and believe me, none of these are anything that they want to do. None of these are in any way guaranteed to even maintain the level of profits that they had been doing before. Fast food places can cut hours. So, instead of giving a pink slip to some people, they can furlough some of their hours. They can cut some of the hours from full-time to part-time so that the cost of keeping some of these employees on the payroll doesn't increase. But that still means less productivity for the businesses because there's less work being done. Now, in fact, some employees have had their hours cut. such that the total pay that they're getting at $20 an hour is even slightly less than they were getting full-time at $16 an hour. Less money. Some of these people are now making less money. Now, these employees could revel in the fact that they have more free time, but they ought not celebrate. They survived the chopping block, for now. But do you think that their employees are going to let them slack off at their jobs as they work part-time and earn more per hour? Now, that would be quite the whopper, or the biggie, depending on which fast food chain you were working at. These fortunate souls keeping their now part-time job will have to earn their keep and work harder during these shorter hours, with the sword of Damocles ever over their heads, that if they don't work during those hours that the employer deems worth $20 an hour, they will see the pink slip too. So this could be temporary or permanent, but for those unfortunate people who are now forced to work part-time and they're forced to work harder to keep their job, some of them might even have to work even harder by having to find another part-time job to make ends meet.
Are you just watching? You grab the popcorn, plant the family on the couch, and flip on the TV. But have you left your worldview behind? Media comes in all forms, and all of it contains some level of indoctrination. Are You Just Watching? The Entertained Christian's Handbook to Consuming Media with Purpose is a guided journal with worldview-shaping info and lots of guided note pages to help you watch and discuss anything you put before your family's eyes. Purchase it now on Amazon.com. And don't just watch.
We will see another thing that is going to happen that other businesses could use as an option is that they could raise prices of menu items to offset the cost of labor to try to maintain profitability. So raising prices. Some people might be getting a raise, good for them, but prices are also going to go up. Now, in a Patch.com article entitled Prices Spike at In-N-Out, Burger King, and More with $20 minimum wage from April 8th, 2024, this is an article that's actually looking back at some of the actual effects since the law went into effect April 1st. The article says, quote, fast food restaurants in California have started raising prices after the industry's new $20 minimum wage went into effect last week in the state, according to the New York Post, unquote. So raising prices, that's not fun. What about people who work in other industries that don't work in fast food, that might still keep their jobs, but they're not paid $20 an hour? They don't get a raise in pay, but they have to deal with rising prices if they want to eat. And you can't tell me that only fast food places are going to raise prices on their menu items. This is like the ripple effect. This is like tossing a stone in a pond, and the ripples will be felt throughout the entire economy of the state of California. Further on the Patch article, quote, the newspaper reported menus in the Los Angeles area showing prices spike at Burger King, with a Texas double Whopper meal jumping from $15.09 in late March to $16.89 in early April, and a big fish meal rising from $7.49 to $11.49. Most other menu items at the restaurant increased at least 25 cents, according to the Post, unquote. Yeah, so who wants to pay more money for cheap fast food? It's not cheap anymore in California. And from another USA Today article entitled McDonald's, Chipotle to raise prices in California's minimum wage increases for workers, we see that McDonald's and Chipotle both declared before November of 2023 that they planned to raise menu prices in April. So Biden inflation has been increasing prices throughout the entire economy, anywhere from, say, 15 to over 20% in some sectors. But then Gavin Newsom has his own Newsomflation in California to add insult to injury and keep prices going up even more. And California is the most expensive state to live as it is. And there's reasons for that. Beautiful weather, all kinds of resources there. It would otherwise be just a wonderful, beautiful state to live if it weren't for some of the politics. But then naturally, real estate would cost more because a lot of people would love to live there and have the moderate, beautiful coastal climate. But then laws like this make things incredibly difficult for the average person to be able to afford to live there, even if they could deal with it otherwise. So great job, California activists. Those who lost their jobs now make $0 an hour, and they have to deal with higher prices on top of that. So talk about kicking people while they're down. Those who kept their jobs and possibly experienced a raise in pay will have to pay more for the same things they used to buy. So their extra dollars, the ones who happen to get a job at $20 an hour, their extra dollars won't go as far as they would think because they now need more of them to buy the same things. Some raise in pay, huh? Another thing that businesses can do is they can seek to automate more low-skilled jobs through kiosks and robots. So more McDonald's will have people order their now luxury-priced McNuggets on a McKiosk. Hey, less human error on the part of order takers, but higher likelihood for human error on the part of drive-through customers for pushing the wrong Mc button on the Mc screen. And all this automation will put some young people who badly need employment out of a McJob. Now, California's law to raise the minimum wage for fast food workers isn't without its interesting twists and turns and quirks, because baked into the bill literally was an exception for certain chains that, well, baked their own bread on site and sold baked bread items as separate menu items. So the Fast Recovery Act, updated by California Assembly Bill 1228, Section 1474, paragraph C, Part 2, says, quote, "Fast food restaurant shall not include an establishment that on September 15th, 2023, operates a bakery that produces for sale on the establishment's premises bread as defined under Part 136 of Subchapter B of Chapter 1 of Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, so long as it continues to operate such a bakery. This exemption applies only where the establishment produces for sale bread as a standalone menu item, and does not apply if the bread is available for sale solely as part of another menu item," unquote. So what is all this saying? It's kind of almost describing some chains, like, say, Panera Bread, that bakes their own bread and sells bread as separate menu items, but cheaper places like Burger King or McDonald's or Wendy's that don't bake bread on site, and they don't offer menu items where you can just buy bread itself. Those typical fast food places are subject to the requirement to pay $20 an hour, but somehow a chain that bakes their own bread and has a separate menu item that's just bread that they bake, they are exempt from the new required wage. Now, before I read this, I had heard about this exemption, and I thought that the fast food chains could somehow get around this $20 minimum wage by adding standalone bread items to the menu. So I was looking forward to them beating this bill. I was looking forward to a silver lining with all this mess. Perhaps I would soon see a new McDonald's McBaguette, or a new Burger King BK Bagel, or maybe even a Wendy's Biggie Brioche Roll. But alas, the killjoys at the California state capitol ensured that that wouldn't happen. The McBaguette would have had to be on Mickey D's menu before September 15th, 2023, and it would have had to be baked on premises. So this bill could have been an incentive for fast food chains to add a delicious McBaguette, or BK Bagel, or Biggie Brioche Roll to their menus. Instead, it simply forced higher prices for the existing menu items. Now, there's speculation that the special carve-out in this bill was because Greg Flynn, a billionaire who owns a dozen Panera Bread franchises in California, as well as some Applebee's, Pizza Hut, and Taco Bell locations, among others, donated to Gavin Newsom's campaign for governor. And Newsom and Flynn also reportedly went to high school together, so there's a relationship there. And Newsom and the legislators helped out a rich buddy who donated to his campaign. Now, let's listen to something that Gavin Newsom said in a news conference on September 28, 2023. Newsom himself said that the strange and suspicious exemptions, like the bread exemption, are part of negotiations and sausage making.
There's a provision in this bill that exempts bakeries, carving out essentially Panera and Boudin.
I mean, that's part of the sausage making. That was part of 257, the original bill, and we went back and forth, and there was part of the negotiation. It's the nature of negotiation.
So, negotiations and sausage making is how bills get passed. So, in other words, we can explain away corruption by saying that corruption is normalized. Now, Newsom could hand-wave all that away at that time, but later on, up to March 2nd of 2024, this was when the clock was ticking and they had just less than a month before D-Day, when the $20 fast food minimum wage was going to take effect, and Gavin Newsom was being pressured to answer questions about the sausage making that he talked about on NBC4. And so check this out.
What a coincidence that it's a friend of Gavin Newsom who doesn't have to pay the $20 an hour minimum wage.
But it turns out, A, it's not true. He never talked to me about it, period, full stop. So it's an absurd story.
He didn't have to talk to you about it.
There were some discussions around bakeries and this and that, but in relationship to this story, it's absurd.
It's a coincidence that that this new minimum wage law did not impact a campaign contributor of yours.
It does impact. The Restaurant Association just came out with a statement saying it does impact.
Now, let's consider this. Let's just think about this. Let's think of the mindset behind all of this. Let's think about minimum wages and the push for a $20 minimum wage as some kind of well-deserved raise in pay for fast food workers. If this is all true, and a $20 minimum wage for fast food workers is just plain good for society, why would a progressive governor and a business owner think it wouldn't be good for Panera Bread franchises? What about those poor, exhausted, overworked cashiers, cooks, and cleaners at Panera Bread? Don't they deserve a raise in pay? Does a baker deserve less money than a fry cook? Make it make sense. Does someone who assembles sandwiches deserve $20 an hour, whereas someone who assembles sandwiches and pieces of bread by themselves somehow deserve only $16 an hour? Once again, somebody please make it make sense. Perhaps Newsom and Flynn do understand the effects of this law to some extent. They realize the minimum wage hike will punish some businesses and obviously reward others. but the punishment and the reward are the exact opposite as what's proposed for the bill. This law isn't a reward for Burger King workers. It's a punishment to Burger King workers, owners, and customers alike. It's a ban on market incentivized labor agreements and productivity for some people. The reward, of course, is to those exempt from the wage requirements. Now, Flynn, who owns all those Panera Breads in California, doesn't have to worry as much about cost-cutting measures, price adjustments, and budgeting overhauls. He doesn't have to worry about the chilling effects that could tie his hands and put revenues at risk. As an added bonus, as other franchises are forced by the law to lay off workers, the labor pool will then increase for Panera Bread. Oh, goody for Panera Bread. They don't have to compete as much for labor, and they get to keep their wages at legally lowered levels. But not everyone can work at Panera Bread for the time being, unless Panera Bread starts opening more locations to employ some of these workers who can't find a good job in the meantime. See where this is going? You impose price fixing to force some businesses to cut or close their operations, and that protects other businesses from otherwise healthy market competition. This is the monopoly that the progressives otherwise complain about, that they think arises from a free market. The real monopolies happen when businesses and government collude, like we see here in California. That's not a free market. That's not capitalism by any originalist constitutional understanding for certain. That's corporatism or crony capitalism. And that's first and foremost a problem with government power, not the greed of businesses. Sure, businesses want to maximize profits and minimize costs. Businesses are not necessarily charities or surrogate parents to their employees, but a truly free market benefits workers and imposes the natural rules of competition for labor and cost-benefit analysis on owners. Let's consider the minimum wage. A legal minimum wage is price fixing. If it's too high, it prices teenagers and college students out of a job that they need to pay for living expenses or even to start their career. A minimum wage job, as it is called, is not supposed to be a career. It's not supposed to support a family. It's supposed to be the first rung of the job ladder for young people to begin their adulthood. They're likely the ones working either part-time while in school or full-time as dependents during summers or holidays while they're trying to earn money for college or studying for certifications or even a trade. They're usually supposed to be the ones who don't need to earn a lot of money yet. They're starting to work. They're learning skills such as responsibility, like showing up on time and being industrious. They may even learn some skills at their first job that can help them earn raises and promotions so they get paid more down the line. Some of them may stay at their first job and become a shift manager after a few years and eventually even a franchise manager or owner and earn a lot more money than where they started. If they don't stay there, they do learn discipline and some valuable skills for their next better job that pays more and requires more skills. So they start off on that lower rung of the job ladder and they go up the steps. So once again, a minimum wage job is not supposed to be what a middle-aged parent does as a living wage or to support a family. It's supposed to be the first rung in the job ladder. And a coercive minimum wage requirement can cut that rung off the ladder. those who are harmed the most by activist minimum wage policies are those who the advocates claim to help. These are the younger and poorer people who are priced out of the job market and have a harder time finding employment for their first rung of the ladder to start their careers. It's kind of hard to start a career if you can only offer unskilled labor that someone decides is not worth $20 an hour. And if you can't have an agreement to be paid less than that to start off, then a lot of people can't even start working. And that's tragic. And what happens when young people, teenagers and college students, are not working and learning to earn money and are instead forced to be more idle? They're looking for something to occupy their time. They're going to be dependent on other people while they're scrolling through social media, binge watching Netflix. They might get involved in gang activity and potential violence. So if we don't put these people to work and we don't interfere with letting these young people go to work to learn to be responsible, they could end up doing unproductive things or getting involved in violence. Yes, minimum wage laws can lead to more poverty and crime.
Hey, I'm Daryl, and I'm here with my wife, Karen.
What's up?
And we're the hosts of the What Are We Even Doing Here podcast, the podcast that seeks to answer the question that we've all asked, what are we even doing here? We cover topics such as marriage, family, life, and living a Christian life in this crazy world. We don't have all the answers, but we know where to look.
Subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on SoundCloud as we seek the kingdom of God and find out what we are even doing here.
Grace and peace.
So, I've ranted a little bit about the minimum wage and especially California's ridiculous $20 an hour mandate for fast food workers with their strange little carve out for places like Panera Bread. Now let's examine the legalized minimum wage and legalized minimum wage increases with some scripture passages. Daniel, you might be thinking, are you saying that minimum wage is in scripture? Well, no, not minimum wage per se. But there are some verses we can definitely see apply to these situations where we interfere with agreements and we make it hard for people to make agreements that benefit both sides. So let's look at Amos chapter 3 and verse 3. And it says, "Can two walk together except they be agreed?" Now what does this have to do with a minimum wage? Well, if we act as a middleman and force our way in between two people and not allow them to be agreed, then how can they walk together? How can they cooperate? If we get in the middle of an employer and an employee, one wants a job, one wants to offer a job, one needs to be paid money, one wants to give money and get labor in exchange, and use that labor and that productivity to make profits so they could use some more of that money to continue to pay for more labor and supplies and so on. But if we have an intermediary getting in the way and brainwashing some people to say, hey, you deserve a lot more than you're getting paid, you're being oppressed, $16 an hour is not enough for you and what you do. You deserve a lot more. And the other guy deserves to cough up more money to pay you what you deserve. If they can't agree, and if they're not allowed to agree, how can they walk together? How can they cooperate? And may I propose that a minimum wage, a legal minimum wage, especially one that always sets the wage at something that is very difficult for the market to clear, how can that not interfere with two walking together because they're not allowed to be agreed? Let's look at Leviticus 25, verse 14. In the context, this is about the year of Jubilee, but this verse is really a principle for all of life and the economy. It says, "And if thou sell aught unto thy neighbor, or buyest aught of thy neighbor's hand, ye shall not oppress one another." So, those who are wanting to push for a $20 fast food minimum wage in California wouldn't really see this verse as a guiding principle, because this verse covers both sides. The seller and the buyer shall not oppress one another. Whichever side you find on the exchange, you are not to oppress the other. In other words, there's such a thing as a market clearing price, and no one should try to exploit the other. One offers a price, one offers the money. If they can agree and come together, and one is not weighing the scales falsely, one is not trying to oppress the other, then it's a good exchange. But minimum wage activism results in oppressing one side of the exchange, one side of the mutual exchange. And this is no small deal. It wreaks havoc on an economy, and it wreaks havoc on people's lives. Think of the people who had their jobs cut on April Fool's Day, and it was no April Fool's joke, and now they're getting no money. They're getting paid $0 an hour, and they're seeing prices for stuff that they need spike up. That's the tragedy, that these type of feel-good activist things that can't understand that buyers and sellers, employees and employers, both have the responsibility not to oppress each other. When you interfere with that, you harm people. And now finally, I want to look at the parable of the workers in the vineyard. Now, I went over this parable in one of the episodes about answering the question, was Jesus a socialist? And so I'm not going to exhaust it much here, but I want to emphasize some of the phrases that we will see in this passage. So Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 15, Jesus says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard. And when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard." Now, a penny or a denarius a day was the going market wage at the time. Verse 3, "And he went out about the third hour, and saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and said unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right I will give you. And they went their way." So in other words, the employer here told these people at the third hour of the day that he would hire them to work in the vineyard, and he said, "Whatever is right I will give you." And so they decided to work. They didn't say, "Well, we'll only work for you if you pay us $20 an hour." No, they took him at his word. He said, "Whatever is right, I will give you," and they agreed to work. And that's how a marketplace often works, without minimum wage activists acting as a third party to get in the way of mutual agreements. Verse 5, "Again he went out about the 6th and 9th hour, and did likewise. And about the 11th hour he went out, and found others standing idle, and saith unto them, Why stand ye here all day idle? They said unto him, Because no man hath hired us. He said unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right, that shall you receive." So these people would work only 1 hour, and they get paid for 1 hour, and they agreed to that. "So when evening was come, the Lord of the vineyard said unto his steward, Call the laborers, and give them their hire, beginning from the last unto the first. And when they came that were hired about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny." Whoa. "But when the first came, they supposed that they should have received more, and they likewise received every man a penny. And when they had received it, they murmured against the goodman of the house, saying, These last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden and heat of the day. But he answered one of them and said, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst not thou agree with me for a penny? Didst not thou agree with me for a penny? Take that thine is, and go thy way. I will give unto this last, even as unto thee. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine evil, because I am good? Now, this passage isn't talking about how society needs to be like the vineyard owner and pay everyone equally for unequal work. No, he was good to the people who weren't hired before, and it was in his power to pay them more. There was no mandate there, but notice what he said to the ones who worked the full day. Remember, they agreed to work for a denarius or a penny for the day, and so that's what he paid them. And it says, is thine eye evil because I am good? So they thought that since other people who worked less got paid more, that therefore their agreement was null and void because they deserved to be paid more. But the vineyard owner said, I do thee no wrong to have paid you what we agreed. And he also said, is it not lawful for me to do what I desire with what I own? And that is what minimum wage activists cannot accept. That's where they disagree with Jesus' own words. Jesus affirmed private property. Jesus affirmed that an employer has a right to pay what he agrees, and that the employee would have an evil eye if he demands to be paid more than what he has agreed. And so also by implication, anyone who's going to interfere with agreements and say that the employer is doing wrong for not paying certain people more than what they both agreed, they also have an evil eye. And so I would like to suggest that the evil eye of Gavin Newsom, the union activists, those who are trying to push for this ridiculous $20 an hour wage for fast food workers in California, and all of that caused mass unemployment, mass reduction, mass price increases. All that blood is on your hands because you have an evil eye. And so for Truthspresso listeners, if you have the idea that some kind of enforced minimum wage law is just and good or biblical, or that even in this case that somehow the $20 an hour wage is somehow biblical, it's biblical to enforce that, and somehow you could just simply enforce that and not have mostly devastating results. Perhaps you might need to rethink that God's economy, God's morality, is not to interfere with mutual exchanges and market wages, is not to nullify agreements, because the devil is in the details. And unfortunately, many California workers are suffering, and young people are suffering, and those who would have been employed justly and would rather work for $16 an hour are going to find out how tough life is going to be. And it shouldn't be that way. And perhaps maybe some of them, out of desperation and inability to find a job that will pay them, will resort to things that we would rather not happen. And so I hope that you enjoyed this different biblical economics-based episode as we covered some of the latest news. And so stay tuned for the next episode of Truthspresso, and God bless.
Thank you for waking up with Truthspresso. Good morning, and God bless your day.
Hey friends, Daniel Minnick here again. If you liked waking up to this episode of Truth Espresso, I would really appreciate it if you would rate it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or whatever application you use to listen to Truth Espresso.